Welcome to one in a series of web-based tutorials for people working with the investment package developed by FAO. These tutorials will assist users of RuralInvest with problems that can arise in using the software. They are geared to people who have already attended a formal RIV course or who have taken the e-learning course, as they do not provide an overall guide to the use of the RuralInvest package. RuralInvest is designed to assist national technicians working with communities, groups, or individuals who wish to improve their quality of life through local-level investments, whether in activities which will directly generate income, such as irrigation, transport services, or fish farming, or in support areas such as access roads, water supply, or reforestation. RuralInvest helps field staff to ensure that all investment proposals presented by applicants respond to their real needs, will be sustainable over time, and will be clearly understood by the potential financing source, whether that be a development project, an NGO, or a bank. This tutorial deals with selecting and using cycles of production and blocks. To illustrate the practical use of these concepts, we will explore four typical cases, namely short-term crops, perennial crops, a livestock activity, and an agro-processing activity. For crop production or livestock activities, it is necessary to specify the duration of the cycle of production and how many cycles can be obtained in 1 year. Short cycle crops such as grains can be planted and harvested one or more times within a year, whereas perennial crops such as coffee and cocoa plantations or fruit trees are planted in a given year, and once the plantations develop, annual harvests can be obtained over a number of years. For example, let us suppose that maize can be produced only during the rainy season and that its cycle of production takes about 4 months, depending on the variety used. Only one cycle is possible per year under these circumstances. However, if irrigation is available during the dry season, 2 cycles of maize production become possible in 1 year. In the case of maize, the cycle of production lasts from land preparation to harvesting the grain. For perennial crops, the cycle of production can generally be defined as lasting from harvest to harvest, or from 1 year from the initial planting. Now we have defined what we mean by unit of production, unit of sales, and cycle of production, we can explore and explain the concept of blocks. A block is defined as a unit of production, for example 1 hectare or 1 animal, with the same income and cost per cycle of production each year in real terms. That is, without considering inflation. To start, let's picture a 5-hectare farm dedicated to short-cycle crops. In our example, the farmer normally plants 2 hectares of maize and 3 hectares of beans each year. The cycle of production of each crop is around 4 months. The income and cost per unit of production per cycle are the same for each block year after year. If, however, changing conditions result in different costs or incomes, for example, new seed types allow an increase in yields, then we will have to define new blocks. The production pattern for maize is 2 hectares for year 1, 2 hectares for year 2, and 2 hectares for year 3 onwards. Similarly, the production of beans is 3 hectares for year 1, 3 hectares for year 2, and 3 hectares for year 3 and onwards. Based on an assumed cycle duration of 4 months and a net income per hectare of $500 for maize and $700 for beans, we can calculate the annual net income by multiplying the net income per hectare of maize by 2 and the net income per hectare of beans by 3. The total of the 2 multiplications is the annual net income, in this case $3,100. If irrigation is available, the farmer could produce an additional cycle of maize and beans in the same year, provided that weather and marketing conditions are favorable. The values of annual net income mentioned before would then be double, or $6,200. For vegetables or other crops with short cycles of production, 3 cycles per year may be possible. Now let's picture a farm dedicated to a perennial crop, namely a coffee plantation of 10 hectares with a cycle of production of 12 months. As a coffee plant takes several years to grow and produce coffee in significant volume, the income and costs of 1 hectare of coffee will vary from 1 year to the next until all coffee bushes are mature. As we do not want to have to define a block for every year of the life of the plantation, we can simplify the production pattern by defining 3 basic stages of growth. These 3 stages will constitute our 3 blocks. The first block comprises establishment of the coffee plantation and applies only to the year the bushes are planted. In this block, there are costs due to inputs and labor, but there isn't any income since no coffee is produced. The second stage is the development of the coffee plantation, during which the bushes grow until full production is obtained. For simplification, we assume that this stage lasts for 2 years. Costs are lower than for the establishment stage, and we assume that there is a small income generated from the initial production levels. The third stage is the full production of the planted coffee. It is expected that this stage will start during the 4th year of the planted coffee bush's life and continue for many years until the bushes have to be replaced. Clearly, during this stage, expected income reaches the highest level, but costs will also be higher than during the growth stage as the harvesting costs are higher. If we assume that the farmer plants 10 hectares of coffee over 2 years, then in year 1 we will have 5 hectares in the plantation block. All other blocks will be empty. In year 2 we'll have 5 hectares again in the establishment block and 5 hectares in the development block. In year 3, all 10 hectares will be in the development block. In year 4, we will only have 5 hectares in the development block, as the 5 hectares planted in the first year will now have graduated to the full production block. And from 5 years onwards, we will have all 10 hectares in full production. Now let's picture a newly established dairy herd. Initially, there are 5 cows. All are fully reproductive and each produces milk and 1 calf per year. We can then define the first block as adult cows which produce milk and a calf each year. The second block comprises the calves produced by the cows in the first block. These calves will leave the block after their first year, either sold off the farm or transferred to the next block. They therefore generate both costs and income. The third block comprises heifers, last year's calves which have been retained on the farm to join the herd. We will assume the farmer can only afford to retain 2 calves on farm each year, selling the others for cash income. Heifers do not yet produce milk or calves, but do generate costs for feeding and care. As for the heifers, the animals stay in this block for only 1 year before transferring to block 1 as adult cows. The fourth block would simply record old cows for sale at the end of their productive life. It is assumed that cows are sold after 6 years in block 1, with the revenue accruing in the 7th year. Thus, we will have the following production pattern. In the first year, 5 cows, each producing milk and a calf, 5 calves, 0 heifers, and 0 old cows. In the second year, the calves born in the previous year graduate to the heifer block. Thus we have the following: 5 milking cows, 5 calves, 2 heifers, as the other calves have been sold off farm, and 0 old cows. In years 3 to 6, this pattern continues, with 2 calves being retained each year as heifers and 2 new adult cows entering the herd from the heifer block. In year 7, however, the original 5 adult cows are sold as they have come to the end of their productive lives. This reduces the adult cow herd by 5, but 2 more heifers join, so the total herd size drops to 10. You can see that by the 8th year, the herd size has stabilized at 12 cows. As each year, 2 heifers enter the adult herd and 2 old cows are sold off. It is worth noting that RuralInvest allows the users to define whether both costs and income are in cash terms or not. In order to understand the cash flow of the farm, it is recommended that 2 retained calves are defined as non-cash income to the calf block, while those sold off farm are defined as cash income. Similarly, the heifer and the milking cow blocks will obtain their new animals as non-cash inputs. If we look at the pattern of production for all 4 blocks, we can see that the values for block 1 and 2 are always the same. However many cows there are always that many calves. To simplify the pattern of production, we can therefore merge block 1 and 2 into a single block and name it adult cow and calf. This simplification will mean that block 1 has 2 sources of income, milk and calves, but no other changes are required. The same simplification can also occur with annual crops. For example, if maize and beans are always grown together, then it is perfectly possible to have a single block for the 2 crops, with 2 income, sale of maize and sale of beans for the block. Costs would generally be shared between the two crops. Finally, let's picture a fruit jam processing activity. For processing activities, the unit of production is often equal to the unit of sale. In this case, both are a jar of jam. Note that it is not necessary to specify the cycle in this case. This can simply be assumed to be 1 year. For this reason, we can deactivate in the software the use of cycles. Once that is done, the only information that needs to be entered in the software is the number of jars of jam that are expected to be produced in 1 year. With this in mind, the production pattern can be very simple. For example, we can produce 200 jars in the first year, 300 jars in the second year, 400 jars in the third year, and 500 jars from year 4 onwards. If we remember these 4 examples, that is short-term crops, perennial crops, a livestock activity, and an agro-processing activity, you should have no problems in defining your blocks. Good luck.